Hello, everybody, and welcome to the panel session on the flow of capital as part of the Hacking for Home Building track within Boise Entrepreneurship Week. It's our pleasure to be with you here today. By way of introduction, my name is Levi Smith. I serve as president of Franklin Building Supply. Franklin Building Supply is a professional dealer that provides materials to job sites so builders can construct a home. So that's my background, but I'm just the moderator of this panel. The real stars of this panel are the three gentlemen that I have with me. And so I'd like you to learn a little bit more about them as an individual and also what they do in terms of business. And then we'll get into a conversation about, from their vantage point, what they see in terms of capital flow into construction-related startups, developments, really a broad array of perspectives that we have here on the panel today. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, let's let everybody know a little bit about you and Yesler.
Yeah, thanks, Levi. So maybe I'll start with, I'm actually a Boise native. I'm in Seattle right now. I'm CEO and founder of Yesler. And so most of my background is actually wood products and wood products innovation, tons of years in product development. And Boise was actually a big hub for that. Spent a couple decades in Weyerhaeuser and then decided that all that knowledge around the supply chain from the mills through the distributors, through Levi's company, all the way to home builders was really behind and really lacking technology. And there was a big opportunity to really focus on the lumberyard where Levi sits and change the way they interact with the supply chain all the way back to the mills. And then later on, how do we help Levi and companies like that then interact with home builders? So real absence of technology there in that whole space. And we like to say we trying to organize the chaos of buying for lumberyards right now. How do we give them different data about the supply chain? How do we give them a different way to interact with the supply chain through technology? And then how do we make all their history available to them to sort of inform what they need to do next? We think about the entire supply chain and how we improve that with technology.
Organizing the chaos is a high bar. I mean, that's a lofty goal.
Are you disputing that there's a little bit of chaos? In the
just a little bit of chaos.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
So, Mark, let's jump to you. You know a little bit about the chaos of construction. Share with us your background and your business experience.
Sure, glad to. We desperately need Matt and Levi to be successful in that effort to have our industry move forward in a good fashion. So almost 30 years ago, co-founded a company called Edlen Development. Over the years, we developed about $5 billion worth of product. Kind of our elevator speech was urban, high-rise, mixed-use, highly sustainable product. We've been on the forefront of sustainability. We've got over 80 LEED certified buildings that we've done over the years, most of which are gold, platinum. Just wrapping up construction this month on a building we're really excited about. It's the first commercially sponsored and largest living building to be built to date. I sit on the Bullet Foundation as a trustee, and of course, Dennis's building in Seattle was the inspiration for ours, which will be net zero energy, water, and sewage, which is really the direction that we think we've got to be headed. We think that the supply chain around lumber is a huge piece of that puzzle. It's one thing to make a high-performing building, but thinking about our food chain is really impactful, thinking that concrete and steel are a pretty ugly process, and using a renewable resource such as Matt and Levi are working with, that's grown right, harvested right, and done so regionally is the direction we really need to go. Our other main focus has been on social equity. We pretty firmly believe the next 2 decades, biggest challenges cities are going to face is social equity, whether that be the homeless, drugs and alcohol, mental health, people of color, economically disenfranchised. And to that end, we currently, and have been for 15 years, we're developing an awful lot of low-income housing tax credit or LIHTC product that's affordable to folks making between 0 and 60% of AMI. And then in the Pacific Northwest and Intermountain regions, building an awful lot of middle-income housing that's affordable to those making roughly 80 to 120% of AMI. And I live in Sun Valley, Idaho, so I'm just down the road from Boise.
Sun Valley, and it's this is pre-recorded. We're at the end of September. You said you got some snow up there today, or you can see some, huh?
Actually, I'm in the Cascades today. We have a home in Oregon still, and so we're over here. But
Okay.
yeah,
All right. Very good.
snow's headed your way.
It's coming our way. Matt's dressed for it. He's got you've left Boise, but you still got the official attire on, ready for snow. All right, Daley, let's hear from you. You're down in Atlanta, and you manage what I think is an interesting fund that engages companies in Atlanta and Georgia. So I'd love for you to introduce the audience to yourself and to what that fund's focused on.
Yeah, so my name is Daley Ervin. I'm the managing director of Engage Ventures. We're a corporate venture fund here in Atlanta in partnership with 14 of the largest companies that are all headquartered here. So the companies that most people recognize are, Delta, Coca-Cola, Honeywell, Home Depot, Georgia Pacific, which is highly relevant for most of you as well. And Invesco is another one, but we have 14 in total, plus Georgia Tech as an LP in the fund. And we invest in companies that match their strategic missions, and then also provide them kind of a window into what the future looks like from an enterprise technology standpoint. And prior to this, I've been on 4 VC-backed companies on 3 different continents. I was an early team member at Airbnb and part of the team to help launch them overseas. And then also, after that, ran a company called Student.com, which is the largest student housing marketplace in the world. And we started that one in Shanghai, China. So I've been kind of across the board from an operator perspective and now on the investment side. And I'm originally from Eastern Washington, born and bred in Omak, Washington, which is just up the road from you guys. But yeah, found my way back down to the South. But I appreciate you being here, and this is excited to be up on the panel.
We appreciate you joining us, and I assume you're not seeing any snow down there.
not this decade.
In Atlanta right now.
1 inch of snow will shut this place down. So.
Right. I'm originally from Texas, and I think 1 inch should be generous. I mean, for us, I think trace amounts of snow just forced everybody to hunker down and wonder how anyone survived where it snowed regularly. That's sort of the actual question they were asking, not just how it's done, but how is it even possible? So, Daley, we got to you last for introductions. Maybe we'll start with you first in terms of the questions. So why did you develop a fund that's focused on engaging these leading companies in Georgia? And what do you see as the benefit for startups and entrepreneurs that are, receiving, capital from that fund for having those type of companies involved?
Yeah, so I think, having lived in some of the major kind of startup ecosystems like San Francisco and New York and London and Shanghai, there was kind of this nexus of large companies working with startups, working with major kind of research institutions. When I moved to Atlanta, that was incredibly true as well, but the Venn diagram wasn't overlapped. So what a lot of people don't know about Atlanta is that we have amazing research institutions, and then we have some of the largest companies on the planet. And that connective tissue was never, really, really intact. And the opportunity is, if you kind of aggregate this customer base, which is, these amazing companies that dominate their industries, startups will be attracted to come down here because their largest customers are going to be here. So when we put this kind of group together, their biggest thing was like, if I want innovation, I have to fly to Silicon Valley or New York City. And in return, they had basically said, why don't we start Engage, put that in the middle of this ecosystem, and then the best innovation and the best startups will get on planes to fly to Atlanta. And that's really what we set out to build, 4 years ago. And from a corporate perspective, the reason why they joined Engage is, one, they're also not connected to each other. So if you're an SVP of supply chain from Home Depot, you don't know your counterpart at UPS or Georgia Pacific. And so how do you actually learn from the best in class companies at the corporate level? So we just wanted to be that meeting spot. And the other one is, how do you have a venture firm that's dedicated to finding solutions that impact your strategic roadmap? And so we work with, over 1,000 executives, over the last 3 years to figure out where they're going strategically, so that we're investing in companies that match, their roadmaps. For, Home Depot, for instance, they made like 4 or 5 CVC investments the past, 5 years, and 2 of those were into our companies. So meaning that we can be a great nursery for innovation that they'll eventually either go on to, partner with or acquire, or kind of influence their roadmap. And yeah, I think kind of the highlights is that we made, in our first fund, we made 43 investments, and they signed 86 contracts with our corporate partners. So the word is certainly getting out that we can be that conduit into the Fortune 500. And now the Fortune 500 here is saying, actually, can you actually be our conduit out to the startup ecosystem and this innovation ecosystem at large? But yeah, I think it's, when an ecosystem comes together, everything gets better. And I feel like there's a lot of potential when that happens, when universities are working with, tier 1 startups, and when tier 1 startups are working with the best in class, Fortune 500, when all of that starts, really starts humming along, that flywheel gets going. This is a self-reinforcing kind of product. And, those relationships have got stronger over 4 years. And we're really excited about where we're going in the future with all of these 3 counterparts.
I appreciate you sharing that story. And I'm really, the first time that we've talked, I was just intrigued with the model, because one of the things that we're trying to do with Hacking for Home Building and working with Boise Entrepreneurship Week is to really get that flywheel going, specifically around, construction, home construction related startups. But it's about engaging all the different players in maybe a way that they haven't been fully engaged before. And I think in particular, a lot of businesses, we have the marquee, public companies here in Boise or Idaho that are used to being involved with startups, but the mid-sized companies, whether it's a Franklin Building Supply or others, have thought, well, we don't have a place. We don't have a role, but we desperately need those companies to engage. And I hope what you shared is inspiring to some of these companies to think, okay, maybe we can participate here. Because like you said, when you get all the pieces together, the entrepreneurs, capital, businesses that can be the test customers and provide the right type of feedback, and the educational institutions, you get everybody together, you can create a tremendous amount of momentum. And we have that opportunity here in Boise to do that around construction, where as Matt talked about in terms of his, being from here and the history that Boise and Idaho have, we've got a rich history and tradition around construction and some construction innovation. And I think we have an opportunity to really make that something that we're known for, but it's going to take everybody figuring out how to play their part. So appreciate you sharing that story. And we'll circle back. Mark, we'll kind of keep going in reverse order here. I'm curious, you've got a storied career in, getting these projects off the ground and getting these buildings built. You're focused on sustainability and affordability. I'm curious what you've seen from your perspective in terms of, what type of innovation do you wish that you would see in those 2 areas? Because it seems like, let's be honest about this. Construction isn't, the sexiest topic when you're talking about, startups and innovation. People don't think of it in that way. We see from our perspective some products that get innovated. So someone might come up with a better fastener, for example, a better nail, a better screw, but that's not sort of addressing the bigger issue of sustainability and affordability that, you articulated well as being, really significant issues for our time. And so I'm just kind of curious, what have you seen in terms of people focusing on making things more sustainable, affordable? What have you seen that's lacking? What can you share with us?
Levi, the short answer to what innovation we've seen is not enough. Our industry is an old hidebound industry. There hasn't been a lot of innovation. I read an article recently about a manufacturer that's doing it, modular manufacturing down in the Oakland area. And the biggest innovation in the last 50 years was probably the staple gun, which is pretty sad. On the sustainability side, I think a lot has transpired over my 30-year career in development and sustainability. I look back on some of the things we did 30 years ago, and it's pretty laughable. Whereas today, I think a lot of it has become common practice, which is great. And it was a combination of really, I think it's more around design and engineering and construction, in learning how to do things more efficiently, how to implement strategies around sustainability. Again, as I mentioned, kind of the introduction, I think kind of the holy grail is our supply chain, and that I think the industry has made a lot of changes to make these buildings more high performing. But I really think we need to get at a more sustainable supply chain. The living building that really does that, all the items that are on the red list in particular, that's a big hit in terms of some of the stuff that's got 1,000-year lifespan. It's nasty to manufacture and bringing it from long locations. I remember years ago when we were looking for sustainable hardwood floor to put in our high-rise buildings. I think we bought it from Guatemala. They shipped it to China to have it milled, and then they shipped it to Oregon for us to install it, which is pretty pathetic, when you think about it. So the supply chain stuff that Matt's getting after, I think, is really a big part of our industry. And Daley, when you're talking about your community, kind of reminded me of what we're seeing now around workforce and affordable housing. And I've pretty much come to the conclusion, certainly in the coastal market here in the West, and the Intermountain region, I just simply think we don't have enough housing. I don't think it really matters at what price point. I think we're short at all price points. And in particular, as you think about workforce housing, Levi companies like you that are hiring folks and bringing them into the workforce at, $40, $60, $70, $80,000 a year, it is very challenging for them to find a place to live that they can afford using 30% of their income as the metric. More recently, we've kind of been pulled into rural Idaho and rural Oregon. And again, I jokingly call us urban snobs because that's where we spent all of our life in our business. And what we're finding has been very, very eye-opening. And that the hospitals can't hire nurses, they can't hire med techs, they can't get docs to come. The schools, they'll interview a teacher, he or she'll accept the job, then they'll come out to look for a home, and they're gone and never heard from again. Vacancies of 11 to 15% in our schools and hospitals, pretty much our essential workers. And that community that you talked about, Daley, reminded me very much of what we're kind of seeing happen. And I think in Boise, it's an enormous opportunity. And that is, how do we bring together community partners? Because it's going to take very different capital stacks to make these projects happen. Once you get below the 60% of AMI, we have some tools. However, in Idaho, they're very challenged because we don't have gap money and we don't have property tax abatement. So really, the only tool that works in Idaho is the 9% tax credits as opposed to the 4%ers. And as you get over 60%, you have nothing in terms of subsidies. So I think we need to bring together employers, government, and the private sector to address these challenges. And if we don't, we're going to see some of these communities, for example, where I live in the Wood River Valley, trying to hire people that make $60,000 to $100,000 a year is very challenging. And if we can't create homes for these folks, they're going to vote with their feet. And the idea of commuting an hour and a half each way from perhaps Twin Falls up into the Wood River Valley is just not a sustainable solution. So key partners like St. Luke's and St. Al's, the school districts, organizations like CCDC and others coming together to really get after this problem, I think is where we're going to have to go. So innovation in capital and innovation in product. We are very excited. Matt, I'm sure you're involved in the mass timber space. We've now had the opportunity to build a couple of mass timber buildings. The living building we're doing is out of CLT. And I think there's just tremendous opportunity in that area to innovate.
I think one of the things you said at the beginning, right, that there's been very little innovation, particularly when you look at, just kind of the process by which, construction takes place, certainly home construction, even more than commercial, maybe some significant improvements in terms of products related to sustainability. But I think it's interesting if we change the subject matter here and we said, it turns out the world or the US, let's just say US, just doesn't have enough planes to move people around, or the US just doesn't have enough phones for everyone to have one in their pocket. Cars are maybe a good or bad example right now, because it turns out we don't have enough chips, right, to produce all the cars that we need. But in these areas, and maybe it is a good example right now, it immediately gets a tremendous amount of attention from the capital markets and from entrepreneurs. They're saying, my gosh, I'm hearing that there's this enormous unmet demand. And so I don't have to be that bright to look at it and say, maybe that's where I should invest my time and resources, because it sounds like there are a whole lot more customers who are wanting a product and could even maybe afford a particular type of product, but they're not being provided that product. But when you think about home construction, I think that message in many ways kind of continues to fall on deaf ears. There are notable exceptions. And so these are kind of broad strokes that I'm speaking with here, but it's something that I think continues to get overlooked. And, it's kind of the one of the things you're hitting on, Mark, again, particularly when you think about what does it take to actually build a more affordable home? How do we build a home in weeks instead of months? How do we develop plots of land in a way that gets to a price point where people that are making 40, 50, 60 grand, or that's their family income, can afford to have a place to call home. So I think that's one of the messages here is there is so much opportunity in this sector, and there are so many unmet needs that we are imploring those in the capital markets and those entrepreneurs out there to focus time and attention here and to come, be part of what we're trying to build here in Boise in terms of really being an innovation hub where we've got the right concentration of, the different pieces that we need to make solving some of these problems more viable. So maybe before I circle back to some of that and get y'all's reaction to even what each of you have shared, let's circle back to Matt. So Matt, you are focused on a piece of the supply chain, and you and I joke about the chaos of the supply chain, but it's only kind of funny because it's also kind of true. It's a supply chain that hasn't changed a lot in a long time, and it's representative of the overall supply chain in construction. You're focused on a piece, but overall, the supply chain construction, and with Mark's example of what it took to go from Guam to China and then to the coast, it hasn't changed a whole lot, hasn't improved a lot. And again, there's some examples we could point out that would be a counterpoint, but again, broadly speaking, it's got some real issues. So what are you seeing in terms of people's interest in what you're doing? In investors' interest, are people, wanting to put resources behind solving supply chain issues on the lumber side? Just give us your perspective from your vantage point there.
Yeah, so I would say that there's probably, there might be more, I'm kind of doing the math in my head as I say this. There might actually be more investors who knock on my door every week than there are people within the industry who are saying, please change my world for me, right? So the people in the industry are, particularly around lumber yards, Levi, as you and I do speak freely occasionally, they're not necessarily the most progressive from a technology perspective, and they may not see that as their role, right? They may not see that type of innovation as their role, but there's just an enormous amount of capital pointed at this space right now, and then it's a matter of how we execute in there. But it is, I would say, the capital intensity around this particular space globally, and also nationally is significant right now. So I've gotten in the habit of all the investors that reach out, they are postponed by a quarter or 2 quarters.
I think, one of the things that's you mentioned there, and I think Mark, you're actually really, just a good example of this for us and how you've talked about what you've been focused on and what you've done. The rest of the supply chain, whether you're talking about builders, dealers, manufacturers of products, mills, up and down all the way through the trades, have to want to be part of solving these much bigger problems that we can identify and put on a slide. For example, affordability or just again, how many homes are there? By most estimates, we should have 4 to 5 million more homes across the US today than we do. And the example I give people, if we were down that much on food and everybody recognized that we didn't have enough food to eat, that I think most people intuitively would say that's unacceptable. We have to figure out a way to solve that problem. But we're really down that much in housing. And it turns out human beings need two basic things to survive. You need food and shelter. We're laughing about our bandwidth here, but we can survive with some sketchy bandwidth. But if we don't have food and shelter, it turns out we can't make it for very long. And so we've got this lack of shelter in many ways. But there's so many parts and pieces to try to align to be part of solving the problem. And even if you're doing great work, and to your point, Matt, getting a good infusion of capital, around developing software to solve a particular part of the problem, if the rest of the, kind of supply chain in some ways doesn't play along, it can really be a significant challenge. And I'm curious, Mark, from your perspective, what is it about you and the folks that you've worked with where you had an appetite maybe early on for sustainability before it was cool? Because you talked about focusing on sustainability, for 30 plus years. And, 30 years ago, it wasn't something that, was a feather in anyone's cap. It took some courage and some leadership to be focused on that. And, same thing with affordability. What have you seen maybe from other people in the industry, that's common traits or something that, make people more focused on being part of the solution to these bigger problems?
Sure. First of all, Levi, I like to joke. I tell people I used to be 6 foot tall and had a full head of hair. This is all that's left. So it's not been an easy road. And Matt, I suspect you're a much bigger student of this than I, but we are so fortunate in the Pacific Northwest and Boise in particular to have some really brave innovators. And I think of folks like IndieDwell, Gurdon, Pacific Companies, who have mixed success, but nonetheless, they're out there pushing the envelope, trying to find a better way to build the stuff more cost effectively. And then, of course, the big one that we all watched and read about was Katerra. And they poured an awful lot of money into trying to address this issue of automating and enhancing the food source for this product type. And of course, as we all know, that failed pretty spectacularly. And I think that just, first of all, hats off to the innovation trying to make it happen. But I think it really is testament to just how difficult of a problem that it is to solve when, I don't remember the exact number, Matt, but $2 billion plus of investment capital didn't make it happen. And so I do think in the Northwest that we're very fortunate to have some folks that are out there innovating. And Matt, one of the ones I like to talk about is the Boggin brothers up in Colville. Yep. And, they are, I think, a third generation timber family, probably pretty traditional. And they just a year ago turned on a new CLT machine that I am told is going to run circles around what we have developed here in the U.S. to date. Also, they're up in Colville, if I recall correctly. And I believe their timber practices of harvesting it off of tribal lands where it's grown and harvested right, and supporting those tribal communities through harvesting on those, it's about as good as it gets. So I think, Levi, we have some really good examples. And I wish I was 40 years old or 35 years old or any younger than I am. Because I really think that some of these young folks that may be listening to us all talk today, I think the opportunity for them to get involved in our food chain around producing built product is about as open as it's ever been. I think every city that we go to, and we've been from Boston to Seattle to Honolulu and a lot of places in between with our product, they all are aware of the problem. They're aware of our supply chain problem. They're aware of the affordability problem. They're aware of the lack of product, and they're desperate to try to make things happen. And it wasn't that way 10, 15, much less 30 years ago. So I think the opportunity to innovate is better than it's ever been. I remember when we first started storing rainwater and reusing it, and we had to get the plumbing codes changed in the state of Oregon at the time. And this was probably 25 years ago. I remember getting in conversations with state regulators about what if the dogs drank from the toilet? Who cares? So I think cities are great partners for folks like all of us in trying to think together how to address these problems. So I'm very optimistic.
Yeah.
And Levi, I'd love to pull on a thread there because Mark mentioned, Katera, Vaughan Brothers and Russ Vaughan, what he's doing with the CLT. And then, what we're doing, and there's a big contrast in there, which I think is really important. So I mentioned that there's tons of capital in this industry, and SoftBank and Katera proved that. They also took an approach, which, again, wasn't certainly on the inside, but there was a lot of capital spent on greenfield capacity, a bunch of new stuff. Whereas you look at Vaughan Brothers and, they have some existing resource, they have some existing people, they have some existing capacity, and they're supplementing that with some capital, but they're funding, within sort of their own sweet spot. Similarly, with Yesler, we look at the software play. We look at how do we, as a very first place to go, bring the software and the technology solution to a really, an older industry. So Levi, how do we give your company what you need, to actually make the transformations? So how do we bring the technology element into the existing capacity that's there, which is a real fundamental difference between the way, say, a Katera attempted to do it, with big money tech company thinking. So I will say, look, we're building this company, by LBM people, which is me and some of my starting, employees. We're bringing tech company, mindset with our CTO, and we're bringing venture capital to it. But we're taking on the software label to fund really the industry and making their own transformation. And so I think that's the key thread there between like a Vaughan Brothers, a Yesler, and how we try to work with the Franklin Building Supplies. So it's a fundamental contrast to saying, hey, some outsider, we're going to come in, we're going to fund it, we're going to put $2 billion into it, and we know better than everybody else. And I think that's this, that's why the startup ecosystem, picking a problem to solve in one space, in one community, and going and building it from there is, frankly, what you're trying to do, Levi, is potentially a better solution than what even $2 billion in capital can provide. And it's sort of core to the way I'm approaching it. So I wanted to pull on that thread because I think that ties to exactly what you're trying to do.
And I think another piece of that is you think about those two examples, and Vaughan, at least as I view it, and I'm not an insider either, they are very focused. And they have a piece of the puzzle that they're after, whereas Katera was trying to be all things to an awful lot of people. And I think that focus when you're innovating is really important because you can't be all things to all people.
Any parting thoughts here? We're running out of time. I wish we had more time to dive into some of the more, some of the additional kind of topics and points that y'all brought up. But I guess we want to wrap this up today. I really appreciate Matt, Daley, and Mark for your time and your input here. We hope that it inspires folks in the capital markets or entrepreneurs to pay attention to the construction industry and housing in particular. The need is great and the opportunities are plentiful. So thank you for your time today and enjoy the rest of your week at Boise Entrepreneurship Week.